In this timeline, the Force did not meet its opposite. It met something worse: indifference. By the time Darth Vader ignited his lightsaber, the first stroke had already been thrown, and the air around Saitama's fist had already displaced enough atmosphere to sterilize the surface of 3 moons. This is not the story of a fight. This is the story of what happened when power that wills encountered power that simply is. And the Force, for the first time in galactic history, had no response. Vader sensed nothing, no intent, no hatred, no fear, no presence in the Force at all. Just a man in a yellow suit standing in the ruins of an Imperial Star Destroyer, scratching his head. "You're the guy they're all scared of?" Saitama asked. Vader's respirator hissed. His hand rose. The Force surged, telekinetic pressure enough to crush a AT-AT into a marble. Saitama blinked, didn't move, didn't resist. The Force simply stopped, not repelled, not countered. It touched Saitama's body and dispersed, like water against a surface it couldn't define. The pressure didn't build, it dissolved, became background radiation. Vader tried again, harder. The hull beneath them buckled, walls imploded. Stormtroopers 3 decks down were pulverized into the floor. Saitama stood exactly where he'd been. "Are you done?" he asked. Vader's breathing quickened. He reached deeper into the dark side, drew on rage, on pain, on the depth of the void inside him that had fueled decades of atrocity. He channeled it all, every ounce of hatred, into a single telekinetic lance designed to pierce Star Destroyer armor. It struck Saitama in the chest. His suit wrinkled slightly. "Oh," Saitama said. "Was that supposed to hurt?" And Vader, Lord of the Sith, Chosen One, Breaker of the Jedi Order, felt something he had not felt since Mustafar. Helplessness. Because the Force wasn't failing. It was being ignored, not nullified, not blocked, treated as irrelevant. And across the galaxy, in the depths of the dark side, something ancient stirred. Not in response to Saitama, in response to what his existence implied. Vader ignited his lightsaber. The blade hummed, stable, perfect. A weapon that had cut through blast doors, Jedi masters, hope itself. He swung. Saitama caught it, not with the Force, not with a weapon, with his hand. The blade didn't cut. It stopped. The plasma edge pressed against Saitama's palm like a flashlight against a wall. The kyber crystal inside screamed, a resonance Vader had never heard. The weapon wasn't malfunctioning. It was confused. "This is a sword, right?" Saitama asked, tilting his head. "It's kinda warm." Vader pulled back, struck again, faster. A sequence designed to dismantle droid armies. 17 strikes in 3 seconds, each one angled to exploit momentum, leverage the inevitable openings in any defense. Saitama swatted them away, casually, like brushing off flies. The lightsaber didn't break. It simply couldn't land. Every strike met a hand, a finger, a forearm moving at speeds that shouldn't exist without the Force. But Vader felt no Force augmentation, no tapping into potential energy, no bending of probability, just movement, casual movement. Vader stepped back, extended his hand, pulled on the Force with everything he had, not to crush, but to move, to fling Saitama into the bulkhead, into space, into the nearest sun. Saitama's feet didn't leave the floor. He looked down. "Oh, are you trying to push me?" Vader's respirator stuttered. He had moved mountains, pulled Star Destroyers from orbit. The Force bent reality to his will as easily as breathing. But Saitama's mass wasn't the issue. The issue was that the Force couldn't find purchase. It was like trying to grip smoke, trying to move something that had no connection to the field of potential energy the Force manipulated. Saitama wasn't resisting the Force. He existed outside its framework. "Okay," Saitama said. "My turn." He flicked Vader's chest plate, once, with his finger. The impact crater appeared instantly. Vader's armor, designed to withstand blaster fire, reinforced with durasteel and integrated life support, crumpled, the chest plate inverted. His ribs cracked, his cybernetic spine shrieked. He flew backward, smashed through 4 bulkheads, and cratered into the wall of the reactor chamber. Saitama walked after him, not quickly, just persistently. Vader rose. Pain screamed through his damaged systems. The dark side surged in response, fueling him, sustaining him, keeping his ruined body moving. He thrust both hands forward, unleashed force lightning. The blast lit the corridor. Blue-white arcs of raw hatred, enough voltage to power a city, to disintegrate bone, to burn the soul itself. It struck Saitama full on. His suit smoked slightly. "Ah," Saitama said. "Kinda tickles." The lightning didn't stop. Vader poured more into it, drew deeper. The walls around them began to melt. Stormtroopers 3 decks away collapsed, their nervous systems fried by proximity alone. Saitama walked through it, step by step, until he stood directly in front of Vader. "You done yet?" Vader's hands dropped, not because he chose to stop, because the Force, his connection to it, had just flinched. For the first time in his life, Darth Vader felt the dark side hesitate, not retreat, reconsider, as if it were deciding whether he was worth the effort. If you're enjoying timelines where power actually breaks the universe, subscribe, because this story only gets worse from here. The Emperor felt it. Across the galaxy, in his throne room on Coruscant, Palpatine's eyes snapped open. "Vader," he whispered, not out of concern, out of fascination, because through their bond, he felt what Vader was experiencing, and it was impossible. A void, a gap, a place where the Force simply ended, not a wound, like Nearless, not an absence, like the Vong, a wall, something the Force could not touch because it had no concept of what it was touching. Palpatine reached out through the dark side, extending his senses across parsecs to observe the encounter directly, and the moment his awareness touched Saitama, it recoiled, not repelled, rejected. The feedback was instant, violent. Palpatine gasped, clutching the armrests of his throne. His fingers cracked the stone. For half a second he felt what Vader was feeling. The dark side wasn't afraid of Saitama. It was afraid it had no function against him. On the Star Destroyer, Vader attacked again. This time, he didn't rely on the Force. He used his saber as a weapon of pure technique. Form v. Gem. So, the aggressive style designed to overpower, to dominate, to turn defense into obliteration. He struck. Saitama blocked with one finger. The blade stopped. The kyber crystal inside screamed again, a high-pitched resonance that shouldn't be possible. Lightsabers didn't scream. They hummed, they cut, they won. But the crystal was experiencing something it had no reference for. Futility. Vader pressed harder. The blade began to vibrate, unstable. The plasma edge flickered, and then the kyber crystal shattered, not from external force, from despair. The weapon died in Vader's hand. The blade collapsed. Smoke hissed from the hilt. The crystal, ancient, attuned, bonded to him through decades of murder, had given up. Saitama looked at the broken weapon. "Oh, did I break it? My bad." Vader dropped the hilt, raised both hands, and pulled. Not on Saitama, on the ship. The entire Star Destroyer groaned. Bulkheads buckled. Supports snapped. Vader wasn't trying to move Saitama anymore. He was trying to collapse the entire vessel on top of him. Thousands of tons of durasteel, reactors, entire decks, all of it folding inward like a closing fist. Saitama looked up as the ceiling fell. He punched, once, upward. The shockwave didn't just stop the collapse, it erased it. The entire superstructure above them, 3 decks, the bridge, the command tower, simply ceased. Not destroyed, not fragmented, removed. The air displacement alone killed everyone in the hangar. The shockwave propagated through the ship's skeleton, shearing support beams, snapping the keel. The Star Destroyer didn't explode. It folded, broke in half, began its slow, inevitable tumble toward the planet below. Saitama floated in the void, surrounded by debris. He wasn't using the Force. He wasn't flying. He'd just punched hard enough that the recoil was keeping him aloft. Vader, still inside the dying ship, pulled himself toward an escape pod. His breathing was ragged. His suit was failing. But more than that, his certainty was failing, because he had just witnessed something that should not exist. Power without connection, strength without source. A being that didn't draw on potential. He simply was potential. Absolute, isolated, uncontextual. And the Force, which had defined every conflict in galactic history, had no answer. Across the galaxy, every Force-sensitive being felt the same disturbance. Not danger. Obsolescence. The Jedi Council convened in emergency session. Master Yoda sat in silence, his ears flat, his eyes distant. "A disturbance there is," he said quietly. "But not in the Force." "What do you mean, Master?" Mace Windu asked. Yoda's voice was hollow. "The Force. Irrelevant, it has become." The chamber fell silent. "That's impossible," Windu said. "The Force is everything. It binds the galaxy, connects all living things." "Yes," Yoda said, "all living things that permit connection." He looked up. "But what of a thing that needs no binding, no connection? A thing that simply is?" The council exchanged glances. On Coruscant, Palpatine stood at the window of his tower, staring out at the city below. He was smiling. Not because he understood Saitama, because he understood what Saitama's existence meant. The Force was not infinite. It was contextual. It only mattered in a universe where beings were bound by limitation, by potential, by the gap between what they were and what they could become. But Saitama had no gap. He wasn't powerful because of training or rage or connection to some deeper well. He was powerful because he had removed the concept of limits from his existence. And the Force, which mediated conflicts between limits, had no role to play. Palpatine's smile widened, because if one being could exist outside the Force's influence, then the Force was not absolute. It was optional, and if it was optional, it could be replaced. Across the galaxy, Sith Lords and Jedi Masters alike began to feel it. The Force was still there, still present, still flowing. But it was quieter, not weaker, uncertain, like a predator that had just encountered something it couldn't categorize as prey. On Mustafar, in the deepest Sith temple, an ancient holocron activated on its own. A voice, dry, vast, older than the Republic, whispered into the darkness. "The Force is not a weapon, it is a negotiation between possibility and will. But what happens when will encounters something that does not negotiate?" The holocron flickered. It learns to step aside. And in the unknown regions, in the spaces where the dark side pooled in its oldest, deepest forms, something shifted. The Force didn't flee. It diversified. It began exploring pathways it had never needed, concepts it had never considered, ways to remain relevant in a universe where absolute strength existed without context. It started learning, not how to defeat Saitama, but how to survive in a galaxy where beings like him could exist. And that learning was hungry. Vader stood in the wreckage of his flagship, breathing through a failing respirator. Saitama had left, not because Vader had escaped, because Saitama had gotten bored. "Well," Saitama had said, "that wasn't much of a fight. You okay?" And then he jumped, not using a ship, not using the Force. He just crouched and launched himself toward the nearest planet at escape velocity. Vader watched him go. And for the first time since he had knelt before Palpatine, since he had burned on Mustafar, since he had buried Anakin Skywalker beneath hate and ashes, Darth Vader felt small. The Empire's response was immediate. Fleets mobilized, inquisitors were dispatched, Palpatine himself took an interest. But every confrontation ended the same way. Saitama wasn't hostile. He didn't seek conflict. He just existed. And wherever he went, the Force became background noise. Jedi who tried to stop him found their connection flickering. Sith who tried to crush him felt the dark side hesitate, redistribute, conserve itself, because the Force had learned something. It had encountered a being that didn't need it, and in response, it began to ask a question it had never asked before. What if we become unnecessary? The answer was adaptation. Slowly, imperceptibly, the Force began to hoard. It withdrew from the weak, from the untrained, from those who took it for granted. It concentrated itself in fewer, stronger vessels. Jedi who had been marginally gifted found their abilities waning. Sith who had relied on raw emotion found the dark side demanding more sacrifice, more conviction, more worth. The Force was no longer freely given, it was earned. And across the galaxy, in temples and academies and hidden enclaves, a realization spread. The Force had always been infinite, but Saitama's existence had taught it scarcity. And now it was learning to ration itself, to survive in a cosmos where power could exist without it. Yoda sat alone in the Jedi temple, his eyes closed. "A question the Force now asks," he murmured. "A question it never needed." A young Padawan approached. "What question, Master?" Yoda opened his eyes. "Am I enough?" The Padawan frowned. "The Force doubts itself." "No," Yoda said quietly. "Worse, the Force learns." He stood, leaning heavily on his cane. "And when a system learns fear, Padawan, it does not return to what it was." Across the galaxy, the Force continued to flow, but it flowed differently now, narrower, deeper, more selective. It was still infinite, but it had learned that infinity meant nothing if it could be ignored. And so it adapted, became denser, more intentional, started choosing its vessels with care. And in the depths of the dark side, Palpatine watched it all unfold. He did not mourn the change, he celebrated it, because a Force that could learn was a Force that could be taught. And if it could be taught, it could be controlled. Somewhere, on a distant world, Saitama walked into a grocery store. He had no idea what he'd done, no idea that his existence had fractured the oldest power in the galaxy. He just wanted to buy cabbage. Behind him, the Force rippled, not in anger, not in fear, in consideration. This is not the darkest timeline. It is only the first where the Force learned fear. Next, what if the Force tried to kill one being and failed?